Hello everyone, welcome to Michigan Man MTG, and today we're going to look at the best uncommons for standard from Marvel's Spider-Man. So before we get into my list, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Spider-Man preview season and beyond. Alright, so let's dive into our list. So at number 15, I've got Spider Bite Web Warden for 2 and a blue mana. Legendary creature that's a Spider Avatar hero and is a 2/2. And when Spider Bite enters the battlefield, return up to one target non-land permanent to its owner's hands. So the nice thing on this is we do have a bounce deck in Standard that does see quite a bit of play still. So this is a card that could fit into that. But the fact that you can bounce any non-land permanent, I think makes this card good regardless of whether it fits in that deck or not. Because basically you're able to bounce, whatever the best permanent your opponent has when you cast this. So I think this is going to see a little bit of play. Number 14, I've got Kraven, Proud Predator for 1, a red and a green mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human warrior villain with vigilance, and he has top of the food chain. Kraven's power is equal to the greatest mana value among permanents you control. So Kraven comes into play as a minimum of a 3/4, and then if you cast 4 or 5 mana value spells or even greater, then Kraven's power picks up from there. So I think this, in the right build, has a chance to be a really solid card in Standard. And number 13, I've got Spider-Man India for 3, a green and a white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a spider-human hero and is a 4/4 with web slinging for 1, a green and a white mana. You may cast this spell for 1, a green and a white mana if you also return a tapped creature you control to its owner's hands. And we know we've got a lot of ways, whether it's stationing or crewing things, to tap creatures, or obviously you can even attack with them. But if you can't attack, you've got some other options as well. And if you're sneaking Spider-Man India in for 3 mana, I think it's well worth the cost, because you also have Pavira's Seva. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and it gains flying until end of turn. So I think that's a really powerful ability, even if you're just, getting that +1/+1 counter and putting it on Spider-Man India. I think it's well worth it. So I think there's a lot of upside here that should make this playable in a Selesnya deck or a Bant deck. All right, at number 12, I've got Wisecrack for 2 and a red mana. You get an instant. Target creature deals damage equal to its power to itself. If that creature is attacking, Wisecrack deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. So this is a spell where you're hitting an attacking creature with it. Hopefully, the creature you're hitting, the power is either equal to its toughness or greater than, and then you're killing the card right there. And then on top of that, you get that 2 damage to your opponent's controller. So I think this makes it worthwhile as an option against any kind of deck that's aggressive in Standard. At number 11, I've got Rhino's Rampage for a hybrid red or green mana. It's a sorcery. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It fights target creature an opponent controls. When excess damage is dealt to the creature an opponent controls this way, destroy up to 1 target non-creature artifact with mana value 3 or less. So I think this actually has a chance to see sideboard play in Standard, even in just mono red decks, because that ability to, kill something, and then if you had excess damage, and hopefully that +1 gives you that extra damage, then you get to kill an artifact that they control as well. I mean, that's great against the VV decks and any number of other decks that we're seeing currently in Standard that have important artifacts in play. So I think Rhino's Rampage is likely to see sideboard play in Standard. At number 10, I've got Molten Man, Inferno Incarnate for 2 and a red mana. You get an legendary creature that's an elemental villain and is a 0/0. And when Molten Man enters, search your library for a basic mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And Molten Man gets +1/+1 for each mountain you control. When Molten Man leaves the battlefield, sacrifice a land. So Molten Man, we see this typically in green, where we've got a creature that's power and toughness is linked to the overall number of forest you control. Well, Molten Man does that in red. So I think, a lot of times our mono red decks are going to have a lot of mountains in them. So it's very easy to cast this for 3 mana, and all of a sudden by turn 5 or 6, it's a 5/5 or a 6/6, or maybe even more, because you're getting an extra mountain with Molten Man himself. To me, this is a card that scales pretty well in Standard. And again, we've got a lot of decks that are scaling themselves up over the course of the game. Certainly is a card that can keep up with that. At number 9, I've got Wraith, Vicious Vigilante for 1, a white and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human detective hero and a 1/1 with double strike. And also Fear Gas is the ability here, and Wraith can't be blocked. So you get a 3-cost double striker that can't be blocked. And because of that, if you have ways of just adding +1/+1 counters to this, I think this is actually a really strong and powerful card in Standard, where you're going to be able to get through a lot of damage because of the double strike ability on this. So finding ways to pump up this card, I think, are going to be interesting to see what we come up with in Standard. But we know we have a lot of white spells that can, that are instants, that can actually, give 2 or more additional power to a creature. So I think those work really well with Wraith. So we'll have to see where it fits in Standard. But I feel like this is a card that has a lot of potential. At number 8, I've got Secret Identity for a blue mana. You get an instant, and you get to choose one. If you choose Conceal, until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a citizen with base power and toughness of 1/1 and gains hexproof. So if you need to give something hexproof, you can do that. Or you can Reveal, until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a hero with base power and toughness of 3/4 and gains flying and vigilance. And I think that's where this card is going to shine in Standard. Remember, we have the Leyline that is in red that allows you to, in essence, double any single targeted spell that you have. So imagine casting this and you're hitting your, any of the cards that are in that deck, the red mouse build of the deck, and now its base power is 3/4. If you're getting the prowess one, then you're going to get the prowess triggers on it. If you're getting manifold mouse, then you're going to make it 3/4. So if you give that, it does double strike ability. It's just going to really, I think, really make that deck even quicker in some ways. And I know we haven't seen a lot of it lately, but I think this is a card that could get us back to seeing that deck in Standard. And number 7, I've got the Chameleon, Master of Disguise for 3 and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human shapeshifter villain and is a 2/3. You may have Chameleon enter as a copy of a creature you control, except his name is Chameleon, Master of Disguise, and it also has Mayhem. If you discard, you go ahead and discard it, you can cast it from the graveyard for 2 and a blue mana on the turn that you do that. So I really like Chameleon, especially if you're playing a deck that has a lot of creatures that are really solid. Chameleon will just become the best creature you have on the field at that point, and because of that, I feel like in the right build, this could be a very powerful card, whether you're, copying a Screaming Nemesis, or you're, copying one of the dragons from Tarkir that is in blue, or, any combination of those things. So I like Chameleon, and, I know in older format, there's potentially even some, combos that are ultimate combos. So I think Chameleon's going to see some play. The question is, what deck's going to want it? Next, we've got at number 6 Prowler, Clawed Thief for 1, a blue and a black mana. You legendary creature that's a human rogue villain and is a 2/3 with menace. And whenever another villain you control enters the battlefield, Prowler connives. So you draw a card, then discard a card, and if you discard a non-land card, you get a +1/+1 counter on it. And this is where cards like what we just saw with Chameleon, I think, make that villain deck possible in Standard, where you having a villain enter the battlefield, he connives, and then you ditch something like Chameleon to the graveyard, and assuming you got the 3 mana, then you can then go ahead and cast it from the graveyard for that. And I think that's the way we're going to see Prowler become a very important card in Standard. In a villain deck, again, that's going to be the limitation of this. Like I talked about in my other 2 videos about villains, that we're probably not going to see a true villain deck, reach tier 1 status right now. But a year from now, when we get the next Marvel set, I think that's the point where we'll have, hopefully a critical mass of villains, and all these really cool abilities on the villains from Spider-Man can actually really be utilized well. All right, number 5, I've got Tombstone, Career Criminal for 2 and a black mana. You can elect a creature that's a human villain and is a 2/2. Whenever Tombstone enters the battlefield, return target villain card from your graveyard to your hand. So if you discarded something, or something's been killed, you can get it back this way. And then villain spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And I think if a villain deck does work in Standard, even if it's a tier 2 style of deck, Tombstone I feel like is going to be a core of that deck, because a lot of the better villain cards are 6 and 7 mana, or at least 5, 6, 7 mana. And because of that, having Tombstone in play is going to go ahead and reduce the cost of those spells, and that's going to help that deck perform better. So Tombstone is my number 5 from the uncommons. At number 4, I've got Silver Sable, Mercenary Leader for 2 and a white mana. You elect a creature that's a human mercenary hero and is a 2/3. And when Silver Sable enters the battlefield, put a +1 counter on another target creature. And whenever Silver Sable attacks, target modified creature you control gains lifelink until end of turn. Now, yesterday I talked about a couple of cards that really worked well with this, and Spinneret is one of those cards that I think really would work well with this. You've cast your Spinneret, hopefully on turn 2 you found another way to put a +1/+1 counter on it, because to get that +1/+1 counter on it, naturally you've got to have a spider. But cards like this can be ways of putting those +1/+1 counters onto Spinneret and Spiderling, and I like that ability. I like those cards in combination. And Sable here I think fits in any white deck where you want to just be able to gain some life, so you modify a creature and those modified creatures become lifelinkers when you attack with them. So I really like this card. I think it's going to see a decent amount of Standard play. At number 3, I've got the Hobgoblin, Mantled Marauder for 1 and a red mana. Legendary creature that's a goblin human villain and a 1/2 with flying and haste. And whenever you discard a card, Hobgoblin gets +2 until end of turn. So I think where the Hobgoblin is going to be really powerful is in the VV decks. That deck discards cards constantly, so I can see you play Hobgoblin on turn 2 or 3, you play a card that's going to cause you to discard something, and there, in a way, you go with it. If you remember how Slickshot Show Off was at this point last year, was really powerful. A lot of cards, were interacting with it. You're trying to figure out how to beat Slickshot because it was able to kind of go over the top of everything. And I really have the feeling that Hobgoblin Mantled Marauder could be a card that does something similar to that in Standard. At number 2, I've got Sudden Strike for 1 and a white mana. Instant, destroy attacking or blocking creature. Great removal spell at instant speed. There's no conditionalness here. It just kills something. Definitely will see, I feel like, a lot of Standard play. And the last card on my list, my number 1, is Heroes Hangout for a red mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to choose one, Date Night or Patrol Night. So if you choose Date Night, you get to exile the top 2 cards of your library and choose one of them. until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. So 1 mana, look at 2 cards, choose one of them in red. So really nice ability there. And then you've got Patrol Knight. For 1 or 2 target creatures you control, get +1/+0 and gain first strike until the end of turn. So if you need it as a combat trick, you can use that way. But I really like this as a 1 mana draw spell for red, with really no downside to it. And red definitely can use some card draw because in the mid to late game, kind of the deck kind of fizzles a little bit. And this is a way of getting that additional card draw that you need to keep going against a control deck or something like that. And that's why I've got it at number 1 for the uncommons from Marvel Spider-Man. So thanks for staying to the end of the video. And tell me what you think in the comments of my picks for the most impactful cards from Marvel Spider-Man for Standard. Again, thanks, and I'll be back with one more video with my choices for the best comments from the set as well. Thanks, and I will see you in the next one.